Hey everyone. Tonight we step into a darker, colder, and far less glamorous world than the one shown in movies. The world of medieval assassins. Not the clean, stylish killers from games and legends. Not mysterious heroes in perfect black robes. Not silent warriors leaping gracefully across rooftops while moonlight shines on polished blades. No. The real world of medieval assassins was uglier than that. It smelled of wet stone, smoke, sweat, old blood, rotten straw, and fear. It was a world of narrow streets where one wrong turn could lead into a dead end. A world of castles with locked gates, suspicious guards, barking dogs, whispering servants, and powerful men who knew very well that someone might be trying to kill them. In stories, assassins seem almost magical. They appear from the shadows, strike once, and vanish before anyone understands what happened. But in reality, an assassin's life was usually miserable, desperate, and terrifyingly short. He was not a legend.
He was not a master of secrets. Most of the time, he was just a ruined man with quiet footsteps, a cheap blade, and no better option left. So before we sink deeper into this grim little corner of history, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if this kind of dark, slow, strange history is something you truly enjoy. And tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is there. There is something fascinating about knowing that people from different parts of the world are listening to the same story in different hours of the night. Maybe it is evening where you are. Maybe it is very late. Maybe the room is already dark, the lights are low, and the world outside your window has gone quiet. So dim the lights, settle in, and imagine the cold stone of a medieval city after sunset. The market stalls are closed. The church bell has gone silent. The alleys are damp. A dog barks somewhere behind a wooden gate, and in the darkness, someone is moving carefully, trying not to be seen. That person is not brave. Not exactly. He is not calm either. He is hungry, tired, nervous, and carrying a secret that could get him killed before sunrise. He is an assassin. And this is the truth about what that life may have really been like. Let's be honest. No one in the Middle Ages woke up one beautiful morning, stretched peacefully, looked out over the fields, and thought, you know what sounds like a promising future? Crawling through mud, hiding in a hayloft for 3 days, and stabbing a nobleman for a handful of silver. That was not how it happened. Becoming an assassin was not a dream. It was not a career path. It was not something a proud father taught his son while saying, one day all this secrecy will be yours. No, it was more like the final station on a very bad road. A road that began with poverty, or war, or prison, or debt, or exile, or betrayal,
Or simply being born so low in society that nobody cared what happened to you. Most medieval assassins were not elite professionals trained in secret mountain fortresses. They were desperate men, pushed into dangerous work because every safer door had already closed. Some may have been former soldiers who survived battle, but lost their place in the world afterward. Men who knew how to use a blade, how to follow orders, and how to stop asking moral questions when coin was involved. Others may have been thieves, smugglers, escaped criminals, or ruined servants who knew the back passages of noble houses better than the nobles themselves. Some were just poor men with nothing left to sell except their nerve. And in medieval society, that mattered. Because if you had land, family protection, a trade, a proper name, or even a small piece of property, you usually did not become an assassin. You hired one. But if you had no future, no reputation worth protecting, no one waiting at home, and no one who would ask questions if you disappeared, then you were exactly the kind of person someone might use. A man like that could be bought. And more importantly, a man like that could be erased. Imagine it. You are sitting in a tavern where the air is thick with smoke and spilled ale. The floor is sticky. The fire is low. Nobody looks anyone in the eye for too long. Then someone sits across from you. Not a friend. Not exactly an enemy either. Maybe a nervous servant. Maybe a merchant's assistant. Maybe a hooded man who speaks too quietly. Maybe a priest's messenger who pretends not to know what the meeting is really about. He does not say much. He places a small coin purse on the table. Then he whispers a name. And that name is almost never harmless. Nobody pays you to deal with some peaceful turnip farmer named Bob who owes 3 pennies to his neighbor. No. The target is usually someone with power. A cruel baron, a corrupt bishop, a military commander, a wealthy merchant, a dangerous witness, a rival heir, a man protected by guards, walls, dogs, locked doors, servants, and suspicion. The money sounds good at first. Too good. A few silver coins might feed you for weeks. A full purse might buy a horse, a new cloak, a chance to leave town, or at least enough food to stop feeling your ribs through your tunic. But that money comes wrapped in danger, because the moment you accept, you become part of a secret. And secrets in the Middle Ages were heavy things. They did not just sit quietly in your pocket. They followed you. They watched you. They waited for you to make a mistake. A medieval assassin had no official place in society, no guild banner, no honest trade sign, no respectable introduction. He could not walk into a marketplace and say, "Good morning, I specialize in discreet political removals."
He could not tell an innkeeper what he did.
He could not tell a woman he loved. He could not tell a priest unless he wanted confession to become evidence. He could not even get drunk safely, because one loose sentence over too much ale could become a death sentence.
Oh yes, I'm a traveling carpet merchant. These stains? Dye. Very red dye. Nothing suspicious at all. So no, nobody dreamed of becoming a medieval assassin. They usually ended up there because life had crushed them, stripped them of choices, and left them standing in the dark with a dirty cloak and a rusty dagger. You were not the hero. You were not even the grand villain. You were the uncomfortable footnote in someone else's ambition. The name that was not written down. The face no one wanted to remember. The hand that did the work, while powerful people kept their gloves clean. And the worst part? Even if you succeeded, you probably would not live long enough to enjoy the payment. Now let's destroy the first great myth.
Medieval assassins did not train in secret monasteries by candlelight.
while wise old masters taught them the sacred art of silent death. There was no dramatic training montage, no ancient order gathering under the moon, no patient teacher saying, "Again," while you practiced throwing knives at a wooden target for 10 years. Most assassins learned the same way many desperate people learned dangerous work, by surviving it once, then surviving it again, then realizing with growing horror that survival had somehow become their only skill. If you had military experience, that helped. At least you knew how to hold a blade without immediately cutting your own fingers. You knew what fear smelled like. You knew that people did not fall neatly when struck. You knew that violence was messy, fast, confusing, and almost never looked the way stories claimed. But if you did not have that experience, then your education was brutal. You learned which streets were quiet after dark.
You learned how to walk without stepping on loose boards. You learned that dogs were worse than guards. You learned that rich men rarely slept where you expected them to sleep. You learned that locked doors were not the biggest problem. People were. A door did not shout. A servant did. And most of what you learned came too late. You learned not to trust a smiling client after the client betrayed you. You learned not to drink from a shared cup after someone tried to poison you. You learned not to hide in a stable after a horse nearly kicked your ribs in. You learned not to climb a wet wall after falling from one and landing in a pile of broken barrels. There were no manuals, no diagrams, no neat instructions labeled, "How to enter a castle without being executed." Nobody gave you a list of common mistakes. So you made them. And if you lived, those mistakes became lessons. You might learn a few tricks from thieves. Thieves were useful people to know, though dangerous. They understood locks, shadows, markets, bribes, and which officials looked away for the right price. A mercenary might teach you how to watch a guard's feet instead of his face, because feet often reveal movement before the eyes do. An old smuggler might show you how to move through marshland without leaving obvious tracks. A former servant might explain that noble houses had rhythms like breathing, kitchens before dawn, washing after sunrise, chapel bells, dinner hours, late-night messengers, drunk guards, sleepy pages. But real mentoring was rare, and usually short, because people in that line of work did not live long enough to become wise elders. They vanished. They were caught. They were betrayed. They were hanged. They were stabbed by clients. They died in ditches under false names. So if you found someone older who knew the trade, you listened carefully. Not because he was noble, because he was proof that surviving was possible. Weapon training was also nothing like the fantasy version. You were not walking around with a shining sword, a perfectly balanced hidden blade, or a beautiful weapon engraved with secret symbols. Most likely, you had a dagger, maybe stolen, maybe bought cheaply, maybe taken from a dead man who no longer needed it. It was probably not elegant. It might have been dull in places, stained near the handle, and slightly uncomfortable to hide under your clothing. But it was small enough to carry, and in your world, small mattered. A sword was impressive. A sword was also obvious. A spear was useful.
A spear was also very difficult to explain at a noble banquet. A dagger, though, could disappear into a sleeve, a boot, a belt, a bag, or under folded cloth. It was not glamorous. It was practical. And practical things kept you alive. Poison was different. Poison sounded clever. It sounded clean. It sounded like the perfect assassin's weapon.
But in reality, poison was a nightmare made of guesswork. You did not have modern chemistry. You did not have exact measurements, sterile bottles, or reliable formulas. You had plants, mushrooms, minerals, rumors, old women's warnings, monks' herb books, and people in taverns saying things like, "Trust me, this root works every time." It did not work every time. Sometimes it worked too slowly, sometimes it worked too obviously, sometimes it only made the target vomit, curse the cook, and hire 6 more guards. And sometimes, if you were careless, desperate, or unlucky, you poisoned yourself. There was no medieval poison control service, no helpful physician saying, "Ah, yes, you appear to have accidentally tasted your own murder mixture." There was only panic, sweating, prayer, and the horrible realization that you had been defeated by your own cup. So no, the assassin was not a shadowy genius with endless tools and perfect training.
He was more often a tired man with rough hands, bad sleep, a nervous stomach, and a very unhealthy familiarity with alleys. Success did not come from style. It came from survival. You survived one night, then another. You learned to move fast, speak little, leave early, and never stand where torchlight could show your face for too long. Your education had no graduation, no certificate, no secret ceremony. Just bruises, scars, stains, fear, and the slow realization that in this profession you were entirely on your own. And now, let's talk about the reason anyone would accept such work in the first place. Money. Cold, heavy, beautiful, dangerous money. Money was the hook. It always was. Not honor, not ideology, not some poetic belief in justice, not the idea of changing history. For most hired killers, the reason was simple. Someone had coin, and they did not. In the Middle Ages, money could mean survival.
A few coins could mean bread, shelter, a pair of boots, a debt delayed, a bribe paid, or a road out of town before enemies found you. So when someone offered a purse heavy enough to make your fingers tighten around it, morality became quieter. Not gone, but quieter. The problem was that payment was often a lie. When someone hired an assassin, they were not looking for a long-term business partner. They did not want loyalty, friendship, or repeat service with a friendly discount. They wanted one terrible problem removed. No witnesses, no records, no questions, no trail leading back to them. And once the target was dead, the assassin himself became part of that trail. That meant you were useful before the job. Afterward, you were dangerous. A client might promise a full purse of silver, half before, half after. That sounded reasonable, until you remembered that after was one of the most dangerous words in the medieval world. After the job. After we confirm success. After we know you did not leave evidence. After we decide whether you can be trusted. after we decide whether it is cheaper to kill you too. So you took the risk. You slipped through alleys, climbed walls, bribed servants, hid in stables, watched windows, waited for the perfect moment, and maybe, just maybe, completed the job. Nothing elegant, nothing poetic, just fear, sweat, silence, and a body that should not be found too soon. Then you returned for payment, and suddenly there was a problem. The client was not there, or the money had been delayed, or the messenger claimed not to know you, or the servant who arranged everything had disappeared. Or worse, someone was waiting in the dark with a blade because killing the assassin was cheaper than paying the assassin. Even when you did get paid, it was never enough. Not enough for the danger, not enough for the guilt, not enough for 3 nights sleeping under rotten straw while fleas feasted on your legs.
Not enough for the risk of torture if you were caught. Not enough for knowing that half the city might soon be searching for a man who looked very much like you. At best, you received a handful of coins, a cold nod, and the warning spoken quietly. You were never here. And you understood exactly what that meant. It meant forget the name, forget the face, forget the room, forget the agreement, forget any of this ever happened. Because if the truth came out, powerful people would not protect you. They would bury you. Some contracts were not even real. They were traps from the beginning, political games. A rival might send you after a target who was already expecting you. A noble might use you as bait to expose another faction. A bishop might arrange a forced assassination plot just to accuse his enemies of conspiracy. You could be halfway through the job before realizing that the door was too easy to open, the hallway too empty, the guard too conveniently absent, and by then it was too late. Hidden men were already waiting. A net dropped, a door slammed, a torch flared, and suddenly you were not an assassin anymore. You were evidence. You could not complain. You could not ask for fairness. You could not walk into court and say, "Your Honor, Lord Edmund failed to honor our illegal murder agreement." The only court you would see was the one deciding how painfully you should die. So an assassin learned quickly, take what payment you can up front. Trust no one. Never meet in the same place twice. Never believe a nervous little scribe who says, "This job will change your life." Because he might be right, mostly by shortening it. So you accepted the job. You were probably lied to about the payment. You were almost certainly in danger. And now came the practical question. What exactly did you have? Not much. Forget the fantasy novels, the dramatic paintings, and the stealth games.
There were no hidden wrist blades clicking out beautifully in the moonlight. No smoke bombs tucked neatly into your belt. No enchanted daggers. No folding crossbows that disappeared into your sleeve. No secret leather armor designed by some mysterious master craftsman who somehow understood both fashion and murder. Your entire toolkit was made of whatever you could steal, sharpen, hide, carry, or improvise. That was it. If you were lucky, truly lucky, you had a decent dagger. Not beautiful, not ceremonial, not decorated with silver or carved with symbols of an ancient order, just sharp enough to do its work, small enough to hide, and plain enough that no one would immediately ask why a poor traveler was carrying something expensive. A good dagger was not glamorous. It was useful. And in your world, useful mattered more than beautiful. You might wrap it in cloth and tuck it inside your boot. You might slot it into a sleeve, hide it under a belt, or stitch a rough pocket into the inside of your cloak. You might carry it in a bag with tools, bread, rope, or herbs, hoping that if anyone searched you, they would be bored before they became suspicious. But every hiding place had problems. A blade in your boot could slow you down. A blade in your sleeve could fall at the worst possible moment. A blade in your belt could be discovered by one unlucky pat from a guard. A blade in your bag could be useless if you needed it quickly. And the worst part was knowing that your entire life might depend on reaching that weapon in 1 second. Not 2, not 3, 1. If your fingers slipped, if the cloth snagged, if the blade stuck, if your hand shook, then the whole plan could collapse before it even began. Poison existed, of course, but poison was not the elegant, silent solution people imagine. It was not a magic drop that always worked perfectly. It was uncertain, dirty, dangerous, often slow, sometimes useless. You might get your poison from a healer, a dishonest apothecary, a village woman with frightening knowledge of plants, a monk who had read too many old texts, or a criminal who swore he knew exactly what he was selling. The problem was that everyone swore. Everyone promised. Everyone claimed their mixture was deadly, and very few people could prove it without creating a serious legal problem. So you had powders, liquids, roots, berries, mushrooms, minerals, and strange little bundles wrapped in cloth. Some smelled bitter. Some looked harmless. Some looked so suspicious that even a starving rat might refuse them. And then came the question, how much? Too little and your target became sick, angry, and suspicious. Too much and the food might smell wrong, taste wrong, change color, or affect someone else first. A servant, a taster, a child, a dog, maybe even you. That was the horror of poison. Once released, it did not care about your plan. It did not know who the target was. It did not understand politics. It did not respect contracts. It simply entered the world and began doing whatever it was going to do. Rope could be useful too. Rope was one of those simple tools that seemed like it could solve many problems. You could climb with it, lower yourself from a window, tie a gate, bind a door, drag something, pull something, escape over a wall. But rope was only useful if you knew what you were doing. A bad knot could kill you. A weak rope could snap. A loose end could swing loudly against stone. A coil could catch on a nail, a branch, or a piece of broken wood. And nothing ruined a secret mission quite like dangling halfway down a wall, whispering curses into the darkness, while your rope slowly came undone. Bows were effective, if you had one. A bow gave distance. Distance gave safety. In theory. But bows were awkward to carry, difficult to conceal, and deeply suspicious near castles or noble roads.
A man with a bow outside a forest might be a hunter.
A man with a bow near a guarded residence looked like a problem waiting to be arrested. And shooting was not simple. Stories love the perfect rooftop shot. One arrow, One quiet breath, one impossible distance, one target falling neatly into history. Reality was uglier. Wind moved arrows, hands shook, targets moved, crowds shifted, torches ruined your vision, rain softened strings, darkness changed distances. And if you missed? Now everyone knew someone was trying to kill the target. The guards became alert. The gates closed. Your one advantage, surprise, vanished into the air along with the arrow. That was why most assassinations were close. Too close. The kind of close where you could hear the target breathe. The kind where you could smell wine on his clothes, sweat under his collar, smoke in his hair, or incense clinging to his robe after evening prayer. No elegant distance. No heroic pose.
Just a narrow chance, a fast movement, and the terrible hope that no one screamed quickly enough. And you did not have backup equipment. If your blade broke, that was your problem. If your poison spilled, that was your problem. If your rope snapped, that was very much your problem. There was no assistant waiting with spare tools, no secret workshop, no second kit hidden under a bridge. Maybe you grabbed a roof tile, maybe a rusty nail, maybe a kitchen knife, maybe a candlestick, maybe even a shoe buckle, held with serious intention because desperation gives strange objects new purpose. In that world, improvisation was not a talent. It was survival. You used what existed. A loose shutter, a servant's cloak, a basket of laundry, a pile of firewood, a dropped key, a horse left untied, a drunk guard's carelessness. Everything could become a tool. Everything could become a trap. And that was the exhausting part. You had to see the world differently. A normal person saw a kitchen. You saw knives, doors, servants, steam, food, hiding places, and possible witnesses. A normal person saw a church. You saw exits, crowds, shadows, bells, confession booths, and priests who might remember your face. A normal person saw rain. You saw covered tracks, slippery stones, muffled footsteps, ruined bowstrings, and mud that could betray where you had gone. Your mind never rested, because in this kind of life, every object asked the same question. Can this save me? Or can this get me killed? Assassins were not hired to deal with random drunk men in dark alleys. No one paid serious money to remove Jeff, the tired candle maker, unless Jeff had somehow discovered a royal conspiracy while making disappointing candles. Your targets were important people. Nobles, bishops, military officers, powerful merchants, royal relatives, judges, witnesses, commanders. Men whose deaths could change inheritance, land ownership, alliances, wars, taxes, or power. And important people were not easy to reach. First, there were the guards. Not one or two bored men leaning on spears. Dozens, sometimes more. Armed, armored, fed properly, and usually more alert than you wanted them to be. Some watched the main gate. Others stood near private doors, staircases, courtyards, towers, kitchens, stables, and chapel entrances. Some patrolled the outer walls. Some guarded inner rooms. Some were not even placed there to stop strangers. They were there to watch other guards. Powerful households were built on distrust, and that distrust worked against you. You could spend days studying their routines. Who walked where? Who changed shifts late? Who drank too much?
Which guard limped? Which one liked to talk? Which one hated rain? Which one had a wife in town and left his post a little too long when he thought nobody noticed? Those small details mattered. Not because they made the job easy. Nothing made the job easy. They only made it slightly less impossible. Then came the walls. Castles were not cozy homes with friendly front porches. They were machines of control. Stone, iron, mud, water, height, narrowness, and inconvenience, all arranged to make unwanted entry as miserable as possible. There were gates thick enough to stop force, towers high enough to see movement, ditches deep enough to slow attackers, courtyards where anyone crossing open ground could be watched, narrow passages where one guard could block many men, doors that opened into other locked doors. Even if you made it across a ditch, climbed a wall, avoided arrows, and did not fall loudly onto a pile of farm tools, you still had to get inside. And inside was another world of danger. Because the guards were only the obvious threat. The servants were worse. Cooks, stable boys, maids, pages, scribes, messengers, laundresses, chamber servants, kitchen boys, old women who seemed to be everywhere at once and remembered every face since the birth of the king. These people were the nervous system of a noble household. They saw everything. They knew who belonged and who did not. They knew which guest had arrived, which monk was expected, which merchant was delivering cloth, which groom worked in the stable, and which servant had no business standing near the private stairs. A guard might ignore you if you looked boring enough. A servant might not. Because servants survived by noticing things. They noticed if you used the wrong door. They noticed if you carried a tray like someone who had never served in his life. They noticed if you did not know where the kitchen was. They noticed if you answered a question too slowly. They noticed if your accent did not match your story. They noticed fear. And fear was difficult to disguise. A medieval assassin was not only fighting soldiers, he was fighting gossip. And gossip in the Middle Ages traveled faster than horses when people believed it might protect them. One maid whispers to a cook.
The cook whispers to a steward.
The steward mentions it to a guard. The guard speaks to the captain. And suddenly, every corridor feels narrower. Then there was the target. Paranoid. Usually for very good reasons. Powerful people knew they had enemies. Sometimes they had created those enemies personally. They had taken land, raised taxes, broken promises, betrayed cousins, cheated allies, imprisoned rivals, executed rebels, insulted bishops, married for power, killed for inheritance. A nobleman did not need imagination to fear assassination. He needed memory. So powerful people built layers around themselves. Food tasters, locked chambers, trusted servants, private guards, secret passages, changing sleeping rooms, decoy beds, restricted entrances, dogs near doors, candles left burning in misleading windows. Some did not sleep in the same place twice in a row when tensions were high. Some kept armed men nearby at all hours. Some allowed only a few trusted people into their private rooms. And those trusted people were exactly the ones you might need to bribe, threaten, trick, or replace. That was dangerous. because a bribed servant could betray you twice, once to take your money, and again to save his own skin. Do not get too excited if your target attended a feast. Yes, feasts created chaos, noise, wine, crowds, movement, distracted guards, servants rushing everywhere, guests laughing too loudly, musicians playing, dogs under tables, cups spilling, candles smoking, people entering and leaving. It sounds perfect. It was not. Because now you had too many witnesses. 50 people might see your face. A jester might remember your strange boots. A servant might remember that you touched the wrong cup. A drunken knight might grab your shoulder and demand to know why he had never seen you before. A child might point directly at you and ask why you were hiding a knife. Crowds create cover.
Crowds also create memory, and memory could kill you later.
Getting close to a target could take weeks.
You might pretend to be a servant, a messenger, a beggar, a pilgrim, a monk, a carpenter, a stable hand, a seller of herbs, a man looking for work, a harmless nobody. You might bribe someone in the household. You might hide in storage rooms. You might follow wagons through gates. You might wait outside chapel doors. You might sleep under bridges and watch the same window night after night. And then, finally, after all that waiting, after all that hunger, cold, fear, and careful silence, the moment might arrive. The target is alone. The guard has stepped away. The door is open. The candle is low. The room is quiet. You have one chance, one move, one clean escape, no mistakes. Because if you fail, you do not become a legend. You become a warning. A body hanging outside the gate. A name shouted in the market. A broken man dragged through the street, while people tell their children, "Look carefully." That is what happens to shadows who think stone walls cannot see. Let's be honest. When people imagine a medieval assassin, they usually picture dark robes, leather straps, a mysterious hood, and a figure moving silently beneath the moon. The real version was much less impressive. You probably looked more like a sick goat herder with a secret. Disguises in the Middle Ages were not elegant. There were no perfectly tailored cloaks, no professional makeup kit, no theatrical wigs, no hidden armor shaped exactly to your body, no stylish masks that somehow made you look both terrifying and handsome. You used whatever you could find: peasant clothes, a monk's robe, a servant's tunic, a pilgrim's cloak, a merchant cap, an oversized guard uniform that smelled like sweat, rain, and its previous owner. The goal was simple: blend in. But blending in did not mean looking mysterious. It meant looking forgettable, tired, dirty, underfed, ordinary. Useful enough to be ignored. Poor enough that nobody expected anything interesting from you. That was the real disguise. Not beauty. Boredom. A good assassin did not want people to whisper, "Who is that dangerous man in the shadows?" He wanted people to think, "Probably another servant," and then forget him instantly. But that was harder than it sounded, because if you were too clean, you looked suspicious. Too dirty, and you might be thrown out. Too confident, and people wondered who gave you permission. Too nervous, and people noticed. Too quiet, and people became curious. Too talkative,
and you risked saying something wrong. Disguise was not only clothing, it was behavior. How you walked, how you held your hands, how you lowered your eyes, how you answered simple questions, how quickly you moved through a room, whether you knew when to bow, whether you knew who to avoid, whether you looked like someone who belonged.
And belonging was one of the hardest things to fake. A real servant did not wander aimlessly. A real monk knew prayers. A real merchant knew prices. A real guard knew the other guards. A real stable hand knew horses. A real pilgrim could explain where he had traveled from, and which saints he hoped would forgive him. You had to become your lie. Not perfectly, just long enough. If someone asked who you were, you needed an answer instantly. I'm Brother Tobias. I was sent to help with the chapel candles. I'm here with the wool merchant from the southern road. The steward ordered extra hands in the kitchen. I was told to carry this basket upstairs. I repair roof tiles. Bad weather loosened the west side. Every sentence was a bridge, and every bridge could collapse. Even if the disguise worked, now you had to stay in character for hours, maybe days. You had to pretend not to understand things you understood too well. Pretend not to watch the target. Pretend not to care where the guards stood. Pretend to be bored while your whole body was screaming with tension. That kind of acting was exhausting, and one mistake could destroy everything. You might answer to the wrong name, bow to the wrong person, fail to recognize someone your disguise should know, enter a room your role would never enter, hold a tool incorrectly, use a word that revealed you were not from the region, or simply look too long at the man you were there to kill. Changing your appearance was not easy either. No professional disguises, no clean mirrors in bright rooms, no careful shaving with modern precision. If you needed to look older, you changed your posture, slowed your steps, and let your face sag. If you needed to look sick, you rubbed ash or dirt into your skin, coughed at the right moments, and hoped nobody called a physician. If you needed to look holy, you lowered your voice, avoided eye contact, and tried not to reveal that your knowledge of Scripture ended somewhere around, God is watching. If you needed a beard, you had a serious problem. Most false beards probably looked like exactly what they were, suspicious hair attached by desperation. And masks? Forget it. A mask did not make you mysterious. It made you memorable. In a medieval town, a masked stranger was not a stylish shadow. He was a reason to shout for help. Face coverings could sometimes help you look sick, cold, burned, or diseased, which might make people avoid you. But avoiding conversation was not the same as entering a noble household. Try walking into a bishop's feast with half your face wrapped, and see how long it takes before someone asks a very pointed question. The truth was, disguise did not truly protect you. It bought time. A few minutes, a few steps, one doorway, one confused guard, one servant too busy to ask questions. That was all. And after that, you had to be invisible, convincing, or gone. Because if anyone saw through the act, there was no graceful way to explain why you were standing in the bishop's laundry room, wearing the wrong robe, holding a blade, and pretending to be in charge of candle storage. In medieval times, an assassin did not have a loyal team behind him. There was no partner waiting on a rooftop with a crossbow, no clever alchemist hiding in a cellar, no handler
passing coded messages and offering calm advice before the mission. No secret headquarters full of maps, weapons, and people who nodded dramatically in candlelight. You had yourself, a worn blade, a false name, and a serious problem with trusting anyone. Assassin guilds, at least the reliable kind from stories, were mostly fantasy. People may have whispered about secret brotherhoods in taverns, but taverns were places where truth went to drown in cheap ale.
A drunk man could describe an entire hidden order of assassins after 2 cups. After 4, he had probably fought them personally. After 6, he was their former leader. In reality, you were far more likely to meet criminals, informers, liars, desperate men, and people selling fake secrets than some organized brotherhood of professional killers. And there was a reason for that isolation. In your line of work, the fewer people who knew you existed, the longer you stayed alive. Every connection was dangerous. Every familiar face could become a witness. Every loose tongue could become a rope. Even your client might not know your real name. If they did, you were probably already planning to disappear. Friendship was almost impossible. Friends asked questions. Where were you last night? Why are your clothes torn? Why do you sleep with a knife under your hand? Why do you leave town whenever someone important dies? Why do people keep looking for you? Lovers were even more dangerous. Not because they meant harm, because they noticed. They noticed bruises. They noticed missing hours. They noticed strange coins. They noticed nightmares. They noticed that you never spoke about your past. A normal life required trust. An assassin's life punished trust. So you did not build much. No stable home, no honest household, no circle of friends, no place where everyone knew your name and smiled when you entered. Because if everyone knew your name, then someone could sell it. Even other criminals kept their distance. Thieves, smugglers, gamblers, and forgers could still be social. They worked in networks. They needed buyers, sellers, fences, tavern contacts, corrupt guards, and people who owed favors. But you were different. You carried a different kind of danger. A thief might bring trouble. You brought death. People did not want to share a table with someone whose presence might attract guards, accusations, revenge, or an angry crowd. They either feared you or saw you as a risk. And sympathy? Forget it. You could not tell anyone how heavy the work felt. You could not say, "I cannot sleep because I keep hearing the sound from that room." You could not admit fear. You could not confess loneliness. If you spoke honestly about your life, people would assume you were lying, mad, or dangerous. And all 3 possibilities were bad for you. So you kept everything to yourself. Your name, your scars, your secrets, your weapons, your guilt, if you still had any. At inns, you chose the darkest corner. You sat with your back to the wall and watched the door. You never drank too much. You never stayed too long. You never answered personal questions directly. Where are you from? Far enough. What work do you do? Whatever pays. Traveling alone? Usually. That was how you survived. Not by being mysterious, by being difficult to remember clearly. Being a medieval assassin meant mastering the art of disappearance. Not just disappearing from a room, a street, or a city, but disappearing from every ordinary life you might have had. You became a man made of gaps, no clear past, no honest future, no place where you truly belonged. Only movement, only caution, only the quiet knowledge that anyone who got too close to you might one day become evidence, leverage, or collateral damage. And maybe that was why the assassin's loneliness was so complete. He was surrounded by people, but could not be known by any of them. He could sit in a crowded tavern, listening to laughter and songs, and still feel like a ghost at his own funeral, because everyone else was living. He was only surviving. Let's say you accepted the job. You planned the route. You bribed the right doorman. You even managed to disguise yourself as a surprisingly believable chimney sweep, which was not easy, because believable chimney sweeps usually knew something about chimneys. And then, at the worst possible moment, you froze. Maybe the target turned around unexpectedly. Maybe another servant entered the room. Maybe the guard who was supposed to be drunk was suddenly very awake. Maybe your hand started shaking, and the perfect plan you had repeated in your mind for days became nothing but noise, breath, and fear. In that profession, failure was not a small mistake. It was not a bad review. It was not a lost payment. It was not an embarrassing story you could laugh about years later while saying, "Ah yes, that was the time I climbed into the wrong tower." Failure usually meant death. Fast, slow, public, private. That depended on who caught you. But death was usually somewhere nearby, waiting. If you missed your chance, everything changed. The target survived. The alarm spread. Doors were locked. Guards started shouting. Torches appeared in dark corridors. Servants hid or ran for help. Dogs began barking as if they personally understood political murder.
Within minutes, you were no longer a shadow in the dark. You were a wanted man. And medieval wanted men did not have a comfortable system of appeals. People would remember whatever they could. Your face, your clothes, your height, your accent, your limp, your boots, the color of your cloak, the fact that you smelled of smoke, the way you answered a question, the scar near your jaw, the strange foreign coin you used at the market 2 days earlier. A rough description could spread from the castle gate to every tavern in town before sunrise. And once a description existed, it grew. That was the danger of rumor. At first, you were a thin man in a brown cloak. By morning, you were a foreign killer with devil's eyes. By noon, someone would swear you were 7 feet tall, carried 3 knives, and could vanish through walls. By evening, half the town would claim they had seen you. Most of them had not. But that did not matter. Fear made people useful to the authorities. And the guards you once avoided, now they were motivated. Very motivated. Before you were a possible stranger. Now you were a threat. A threat meant reward money. A threat meant praise from a lord. A threat meant promotion. A threat meant someone could beat you half to death in the street and call it service. So they searched. Not calmly. Not gently. They kicked open doors. They questioned innkeepers. They stopped travelers. They checked stables. They watched gates. They searched wagons. They asked beggars, children, priests, and merchants whether they had seen anyone suspicious. And in medieval life, suspicious was a very flexible word. A man walking too fast was suspicious. A man walking too slowly was suspicious. A man hiding his face was suspicious. A man showing his face too openly was suspicious. A man with mud on his boots was suspicious. A man without mud on his boots was clearly trying too hard. Failure made the whole world hostile.
But sometimes the target was not even your biggest problem. Your client was. If you failed, you stopped being useful and became dangerous. You knew too much. You knew who had ordered the job. You knew where the meeting took place. You knew the messenger's face. You knew the amount promised. You knew which servant was bribed. You might know which noble wanted which rival removed. If you were captured, you could be questioned, and medieval questioning was not designed to protect your comfort. Powerful people feared loose tongues. A captured assassin could destroy alliances, expose plots, ruin reputations, or start wars. Even if you tried to remain silent, no one trusted silence under pain, fear, or threat. So the person who hired you might quickly decide that removing you was easier than rescuing you. Maybe a rider would be sent ahead to warn the gates. Maybe another killer would be paid. Maybe your supposed safe house would suddenly become very unsafe. Maybe the innkeeper who once smiled at you would receive a quiet instruction and a coin. There were no second chances, no polite apology, no professional sympathy, no, sorry, the timing was bad. We understand the target unexpectedly changed rooms. You had one moment, one chance, and if you ruined it, the best you could hope for was to escape before anyone discovered who had sent you. Failure also brought shame, though not the noble kind sung about in halls. It was the quiet, humiliating kind, the shame of having failed at the only thing that made you valuable. You had failed not only to finish the job, you had failed to remain invisible. And for an assassin, invisibility was everything. It did not matter if you had succeeded before. No one cared if you had completed 12 dangerous jobs, crossed 3 cities under false names, or slipped out of guarded halls like a whisper. In that world, you were only as good as your last mission. And if your last mission failed, then the only thing left to do was run. So imagine you actually did it. The plan worked. The blade found its mark. There were no screams at first, no guards bursting through the door, no immediate disaster. Just one powerful person suddenly removed from the world. His plans, debts, ambitions, enemies, and secrets, ending in a room that had been safe until you entered it. Congratulations. Now run. Because success as a medieval assassin did not mean relaxing on a rooftop with wine while the city panicked below. It meant danger had only changed shape. Before the strike, danger was reaching the target. After the strike, danger was escaping the consequences. And sometimes the second part was worse. There was no victory lap, no drink with colleagues,
No calm meeting with your client where everyone shook hands and agreed the work had been professionally handled.
You did not even have time to enjoy the impossible fact that you had survived long enough to complete the mission. The moment the strike was done, your real job became escape. Doors that were open minutes ago might now be locked. Corridors that were empty might fill with voices. A servant might enter unexpectedly and drop a tray with a crash. A dog might start barking. A guard might notice a missing post. A candle might reveal your face. Your clothing might be stained. Your hands might tremble. You might be wounded, exhausted, lost, or carrying evidence you had no time to hide. That meant escape had to be planned before the attack, not after. After was too late. You needed routes, more than one. A main route if luck stayed with you, a second route if the first failed, a third route if the world became unreasonable, which it usually did. You needed exits, a postern gate, a kitchen door, a stable passage, a roof line, a drain tunnel, a broken wall, a servant's stair,
A window that opened onto something survivable, rather than a long fall into regret. You needed disguises. Maybe one set of clothes for entering and another for leaving. Maybe a cloak hidden under straw. Maybe a servant's cap. Maybe a bundle to carry, because people with bundles looked like they had somewhere ordinary to be. You needed a story. Not a heroic story. A boring one. I was sent for water. I am taking this cloth to the laundry. The steward asked for me. My master is waiting outside. Boring lies were safer than clever lies. Clever lies invited questions, and questions were blades with words on them. If you were lucky, you had a safe house, but safe houses were only as safe as the people inside them. Maybe it was a room above a cooper's workshop. Maybe a shed behind a stable. Maybe a loft where rats had already claimed most of the blankets. Maybe a widow who asked no questions because she had been paid not to have curiosity. But every safe place could become a trap.
The client might know it. The guards might discover it. The owner might panic. A neighbor might notice that strange men came at odd hours. So you never trusted one hiding place completely. You hid briefly, then moved, then hid again. If the city gates remained open, you left quickly. If they closed, you became part of the city's dirt and shadow. You waited. You changed clothes. You shaved if you could. You dirtied your face if you were too clean. You cleaned your face if you were too dirty. You became someone else before people fully understood who they were looking for. But medieval cities could close around you faster than expected. Gates shut. Watchmen doubled. Travelers were stopped. Ferry crossings were watched. Bridges were guarded. Markets were searched. And suddenly the city that had seemed chaotic and full of hiding places became a cage made of stone, mud, and human memory. Then came the client. Assuming they had ever planned to pay you, they probably were not waiting in a warm tavern with a smile and a thank you note. More likely, they vanished too. Because an assassin who has just completed a job is not only useful, he is dangerous. You knew the secret. You knew the name behind the order. You knew exactly how a powerful man had died and who benefited from it. You had already proven that you could reach someone considered untouchable. That made you terrifying, even to the person who hired you. So even after success, you walked away with coin in one hand and a target
on your back. And what did victory really give you? A week sleeping in lofts, bribing ferry captains, avoiding main roads, changing names, speaking with a different accent if you can manage it, shaving in the dark with bad water and a blade not made for shaving. Pretending to be harmless while every sound behind you made your shoulders tighten. Because success did not mean safety.
It meant beginning the same nightmare somewhere else, under another false name, with even more people searching for you. So yes, you made the kill. Now run like your life depends on it. Because it does. And if the life of a medieval assassin was not miserable enough already, poor, hunted, lonely, betrayed, and sleeping in places that smelled suspiciously like goats, there was another problem. Superstition. In the Middle Ages, assassins were not simply feared as criminals. They were often treated like cursed figures. To ordinary villagers, a killer in a hood was not just a dangerous man. He might be something darker. A servant of demons, a carrier of curses, a poisoner who knew forbidden herbs, a stranger whose blade had been blessed backward by witches. A man who could pass through guarded places because he had help from powers no Christian soul should touch. After all, how else could someone move unseen, strike a powerful lord, and vanish into the night? Logic was not exactly the strongest force in medieval life, but superstition? That was everywhere. People believed in omens, curses, holy signs, bad dreams, witchcraft, saints, devils, relics, blessings, and punishments from God. Every strange event needed meaning. Every sudden death needed an explanation. Every shadow could become a warning if enough frightened people looked at it. Some believed killers could change shape. Others claimed they could become invisible unless washed with holy water. Some whispered that assassins carried powders that could make a person sleep forever. Others said they could send death through walls. A few probably believed assassins stole the final breath from a sleeping man and kept it in a little leather pouch. Was any of that true? No. But truth mattered less than fear. Imagine walking through a village and hearing someone mutter, "Don't look at him. He might curse the child." Imagine trying to buy bread while the baker's wife crosses herself. Imagine sitting near a hearth while people slowly move away from you. Not because they know what you are, but because they feel something is wrong. Even your tools could become part of the fear. A dagger was not simply a dagger. People might say it had been forged in a cursed place, cooled in blood, or stolen from a grave. Poison was not knowledge of plants or minerals. It was witchcraft. A small pouch of herbs could become proof that you served dark forces. A vial of bitter liquid could become evidence that you had killed half the countryside. Even silence could condemn you. Why does he not speak? Why does he not laugh? Why does he watch the door? Why does the dog growl when he passes? Why did old Martin die the same week this stranger arrived? You might think fear would help you. Sometimes it did. People avoided you. They did not ask too many questions. They left space around you at the tavern. They lowered their voices when you entered. But that kind of fear was dangerous. Superstitious crowds did not always ask questions. They threw stones,
They lit fires. They shouted accusations before anyone had proof. The moment someone died strangely, from illness, accident, spoiled food, fever, or choking at dinner, someone could whisper, "Maybe it was him. Maybe the Shadow Man did it. Maybe the stranger brought death with him." And suddenly, you were guilty because you were nearby, quiet, unfamiliar, or simply unlucky. That meant you had to keep moving. Always. Stay in one place too long, and suspicion started to grow. A priest might mention your name in warning. Farmers might gather tools. A mother might pull her children away when you passed. Someone might remember your accent. Someone might ask where you slept. Someone might notice foreign coins. Someone might wonder why you bought herbs but never cooked anything. In a world that believed monsters could wear human faces, being too quiet, too clever, or too quick made you dangerous.
And in medieval logic, dangerous things were not always investigated carefully. Sometimes they were destroyed quickly. Poison. The assassin's supposedly elegant weapon. Quiet death. No struggle, no shouting, no clash of steel. Just a sip from a cup, a slow stumble, a final breath, and the job is done. At least, that is how people imagine it. In reality, poisoning someone in the Middle Ages was more like trying to win a fight with herbal tea, bad measurements, and terrible confidence. First of all, poisons were unreliable. You did not have modern chemicals, clean laboratories, exact doses, or neat little capsules labeled instant doom. You had plants, mushrooms, minerals, old recipes, hearsay, dangerous experiments, and the deeply unhelpful phrase, "I heard this works." You gathered, you crushed, you dried, you mixed, you hid the smell. You tried not to breathe too much of it. Then you hoped. And hope was not a science. The result might be deadly, Or it might only make the target sweat, vomit, cancel dinner, and become suspicious of everyone who had touched the food. There was no precise dosage. You guessed. Too little and nothing happened. Too much and the food might taste wrong. Or someone else might collapse first. That was one of the great risks of poison. It did not respect intention. A cup could be passed. A plate could be shared. A servant could taste too much. A child could take a sweet. A dog could eat scraps from the floor. A taster could die before the target, turning the whole hall into chaos before the actual victim had swallowed anything. And speaking of kitchens, they were nightmares. You could not simply stroll into a noble household and sprinkle something into the soup like a stage villain. Kitchens were busy, loud, crowded places. Cooks shouted, servants carried pots, boys ran with water, dogs lurked under tables, smoke filled the air, knives moved quickly. Stewards watched portions.
Food came and went constantly. Everyone was tired, overworked, and irritable. That might sound useful. It was not. Because irritable people noticed interruptions. If you stood in the wrong place, someone would yell at you. If you touched the wrong pot, someone would slap your hand away. If you looked too clean, too idle, too strange, too calm, or too interested in the Lord's private dish, people would notice. To poison someone powerful, you needed access. Access meant risk. You might bribe a cook, but cooks were not fools.
They understood danger. They knew that if a noble died at dinner, the kitchen would be the first place searched, and the staff would be the first people questioned. A cook might take your money, then report you. Or take your money, then panic. Or take your money, then decide that living was better than being involved in treason. You might impersonate a servant, but servants knew each other. You might sneak in at night, but food was not always prepared at night.
You might poison wine, but wine could be stored, moved, diluted, shared, blessed, guarded, or tasted. If your victim was powerful, eating was not casual. It was security. Food might be watched, smelled, blessed, tasted, and inspected by half the household before it reached the table. By the time a dish arrived in front of a lord, it might have survived more political suspicion than a royal marriage. And even if the poison was added, even if no one noticed, even if the target swallowed it, the next part was still unpredictable. Some poisons worked slowly, too slowly. The victim might die hours later, days later, or after leaving the place where you had any control over the situation. That could be useful or disastrous, because slow death created investigation. People asked what he ate, who served him, who visited, who was new, who had reason to hate him, who disappeared too quickly afterward. Some poisons worked too obviously.
The victim might seize the cup, gasp, point, shout, collapse, or create immediate panic. Not exactly subtle. Some gave the target enough time to speak, and speaking was dangerous. A dying man might name the wrong person, or the right one. Either way, the hall erupted. If the target survived, your situation became much worse. Now he was alive, angry, frightened, and surrounded by people desperate to prove loyalty by finding someone to punish. Suspicion would not fall kindly. It would fall widely. The cook, the taster, the cupbearer, the guest, the servant, the strange man with herbs, the quiet traveler who left town too soon. So no, poison was not easy. It was slow, risky, uncertain, morally ugly even by assassin standards, and packed with ways to fail. And if you were caught with poison, things became especially bad. A blade could be explained poorly. A rope could have many uses. Even a disguise could be blamed on foolishness. But poison? Poison made people afraid.
It suggested planning, secrecy, cowardice, witchcraft, and treason all at once. You would not be treated like an ordinary criminal. You would be questioned until someone decided you had confessed to poisoning everyone from the Duke himself to the household dog. And once that began, truth became almost irrelevant. The story had already found its villain, and that villain was you. You might think that if you changed the course of history, removed a tyrant, ruined a royal bloodline, silenced a dangerous political enemy, or ended a war before it could fully begin, someone would remember your name. But no, you were an assassin. Your name was never meant to survive. At best, you became a rumor, a hooded figure, a foreigner with cold eyes, a quiet man at the inn who never finished his drink, a shadow near the chapel, a stranger seen by the gate before dawn. A whisper passed from one frightened mouth to another,
until nobody knew what was true anymore.
That was the strange cruelty of the profession. You could do something enormous and still remain almost nothing. A king might die. A noble house might collapse. A war might begin. A marriage alliance might fail. A bishop's rival might suddenly gain power. A border might change hands because one commander never reached the battlefield. And yet the person who caused it might be remembered only as an unknown man, or not remembered at all. The official record might say, sudden illness, tragic accident, act of God, bandit attack, unknown culprit, unexplained death. Those phrases could hide 1,000 crimes, and that was exactly the point. Your client did not want a story. They wanted distance. They wanted denial. They wanted clean hands and a shocked expression. The fewer people knew who had done the work, the safer, powerful people remained, especially the one who had paid for it. So your name was buried almost as soon as the job was finished, if you even used your real name at all.
And most likely, you did not. Names were dangerous. A real name could be followed. A real name could be sold. A real name could be repeated under questioning. A real name could reach the wrong ear and turn into soldiers at your door. So you collected false names the way other men collected debts. In one town you were Martin, in another Elias, on the road Thomas, at the inn Will, to the client perhaps nobody at all. After a while, even your own name might begin to feel distant, something from a childhood that no longer seemed connected to you. You did not sign your work. You did not boast. You did not leave symbols carved into walls. You did not whisper dramatic phrases over your targets like a man in a story. You existed only for the moment of the act, and then you were supposed to disappear. That was the bargain. Do the work, leave no mark, become nobody again. And if someone did know your true name, that made them dangerous. Or worse, it made you dangerous to them.
In this profession, loose ends rarely lasted long. Forget honor. There were no medals for silence, no monuments for the man who ended a war with one blade in the dark. No songs for the person who changed a kingdom's future and vanished before sunrise. If a noble wanted a statue, he built one for himself. You got an unmarked grave, a ditch, a wooden box, a field where nobody asked questions. Or, if things ended badly, your head displayed as a warning with the word traitor attached to it, even if you had never cared about politics in your life. Sometimes your name was remembered only as a curse, a warning, a story told quietly when people discussed betrayal. Do not cross the Duke. Remember what happened to Lord Ulrich. And the person who did it? Gone, like smoke. That was your legacy. Not fame, not glory, not even proper fear. Just absence. You were not meant to leave a mark. You were meant to erase one. Then erase yourself. Because in the medieval world, heroes were remembered. Saints were remembered. Kings were remembered. Victors were remembered. Even villains were remembered if they were rich enough. But assassins? Assassins were removed from the story. And perhaps that was the loneliest part of all. To risk everything, to walk through danger, to carry secrets that could shake a kingdom, and still know that if history ever mentioned the event, it would probably forget you entirely. So imagine you survived. You completed the mission. You even managed to get paid, which honestly was almost a miracle by itself. Now all you had to do was stay quiet, keep your head low, and trust that your client would honor the agreement and protect your identity. Right? Wrong. Because in the world of medieval assassination, there was one rule even more important than do not get caught. Never trust anyone, especially the person paying you.
Your client, whether a noble, a merchant, a bishop, a military commander, or some smiling court official with clean fingernails and dirty intentions, did not hire you out of respect. They hired you because they needed something terrible done, and you were simply the tool they chose to use. But once the job was finished, the tool became a problem. You knew too much. You knew who wanted someone dead. You knew why. You knew when. You knew where the order came from. You knew who carried the message. You knew how much silver changed hands. That knowledge was more dangerous than any dagger, because a dagger could be taken away. Knowledge could escape. It could be spoken in a tavern, whispered to a priest, screamed under questioning, sold to an enemy, written down by someone who understood how valuable it was. So what did clients often do? They disappeared. They denied ever meeting you. They sent word through servants that the arrangement had never existed.
Or worse, they sent someone else after you. A second blade. A second shadow. A second desperate man promised payment for removing the first one. That was the cleanest ending from their point of view. The target was dead, the assassin was dead. The secret was buried between them. No witnesses, no debt, no loose end. There may have been situations where a powerful person arranged two killers at once, one to complete the assassination and another to remove the assassin immediately afterward. No refund, no gratitude, no farewell. Just reduced risk. And if you were foolish enough to threaten the client, to blackmail them, or to say you might expose the truth, that was bold. It was also probably your final mistake. Powerful people in the Middle Ages did not negotiate fairly with hired killers. They crushed them. They had guards, they had prisons, they had judges. They had priests willing to call you sinful. They had scribes willing to record whatever version of events served power best.
You had a knife, a bad reputation, and no legal argument that could be spoken aloud. If your client had even a small sense of honor, a rare and delicate thing, like a flower growing in a battlefield, you might receive your payment and be allowed to walk away. But even then, you still had to assume someone was watching. Someone near the well. Someone near the stable. Someone at the edge of the market. Someone who looked away too quickly when you noticed him. Someone memorizing your walk. Someone learning your habits. Someone asking what road you took. Someone sharpening steel. You were the secret that could not be allowed to speak. The shadow that could not be permitted to settle down. Even success
did not earn trust. Because in their eyes, if you had killed once, you could kill again. And no one, not even the person who hired you, wanted to be next. Let's say, somehow, you beat the odds. You survived the missions. You escaped the traps. You lived through the poison, the betrayals, the lies, the guards, the mobs, the clients who decided you were safer dead than paid, and the nights when every footstep behind you sounded like the end. You outlived your enemies. You outlived your employers. You may have even outlived what was left of your conscience. So what came next? Retirement? Absolutely not. Medieval assassins did not get peaceful endings. There were no farewell feasts, no quiet cottages near the sea, no pensions paid in gold, no grateful whispers from powerful people who owed everything to your silence. You did not step away into a calm life and spend your final years growing herbs, feeding chickens, and pretending your hands had never done terrible work. You either vanished, died, or did both in a way no one bothered to record. The problem was simple. You were never truly safe. Even if you walked away from the work did not walk away from you. You carried too many secrets, too many names.
Too many memories of locked rooms, whispered orders, hidden payments, false promises, and people who vanished because someone rich decided they should. Powerful men did not want you retired. They wanted you forgotten. And forgotten often meant buried. Even if no one came for you, and that was a very big if, you still had to live with the fear that someone might. Maybe a younger killer, eager to prove himself, had just accepted a contract on an old shadow with a false name. Maybe a noble you thought had forgotten had not forgotten at all. Maybe a servant from 30 years ago recognized your walk in the market. Maybe the son of a man you killed had grown into someone with money and patience. Maybe the past was already riding toward your village. So you changed your name again. You moved somewhere quiet. You pretended to be harmless. A retired guard, a traveling herbalist, a limping craftsman, a widower with no interesting stories, a man who had seen some trouble but did not enjoy speaking of it. But peace never really came. You avoided crowds. You watched strangers too closely. You sat facing the door. You kept a blade hidden under the floorboards beside a pouch of coins you never spent, because even years later, the money still felt cursed. And you could not entirely trust yourself either. Years of silence, violence, fear, and sudden escapes left marks no disguise. Every knock at the door made your body tense. Every unfamiliar traveler looked like a threat. Every dream felt dangerous. Every kindness felt like the beginning of a trap. You could not love easily. You could not relax. You could not laugh too loudly. You could not sleep deeply. You lived like a ghost, pretending to be a man. That was the truth of the assassin's ending. There was no final reward. No last peaceful chapter. Only a slow, cold fading into obscurity. Always moving, always watching, until one day you disappeared into the dark and nobody noticed. And maybe, for someone like that, being forgotten was the closest thing to mercy. There was also one thing medieval assassins feared almost as much as guards: bad information. Because in this line of work, a wrong rumor could kill you faster than a sword.
You might be told that your target slept in the West Tower, only to discover that he had moved to the chapel chambers 3 nights ago. You might hear that the rear gate guard drank heavily every evening, only to find him painfully sober, suspicious, and holding a spear with great enthusiasm. You might be promised that the servant was loyal, only to learn that loyalty had been sold twice, once to you, and once to someone with a larger purse. Information was everything, and most of it was terrible. There were no maps with glowing marks, no secret files.
No neat sketches showing windows, doors, staircases, guard routes, private chambers, and emergency exits. You had gossip, tavern whispers, bribed servants, half-heard arguments, market rumors, old women who saw too much, children who repeated things they did not understand, and the questionable memory of a man who had been drinking since sunrise. Sometimes your source lied. Sometimes they were wrong. Sometimes they were right yesterday, but the entire situation changed before sunset. That was the problem. The world moved. Targets changed plans. Guards changed shifts. Doors were repaired. Roads flooded. Feasts were cancelled. Illness spread through households. A noble might leave early. A bishop might cancel dinner. A captain might double the guards because he had a bad dream, heard a rumor, or simply disliked the way the evening felt. And suddenly your perfect plan became useless. So you had to watch. For hours. For days. Sometimes for weeks.
You learned the rhythms of a place the way a farmer learned the weather. When the kitchen fires were lit. When servants carried water. When the gate opened. When the chapel bell rang. When the guards changed. Which dog barked at strangers. Which window stayed open because the room smelled of damp wool. Which servant slipped away to meet a lover. Which guard accepted food. Which guard accepted nothing. This was the slow part of assassination that stories usually skip. The waiting, the watching, the boredom mixed with fear. The endless hours where nothing happened, and yet every moment could ruin you. You could spend 3 nights hidden near a wall, cold and hungry, only to realize you had been watching the wrong building. You could sit in a tavern for a week pretending to be a quiet traveler while listening for one useful sentence. You could follow a servant through the market and learn nothing except that he liked onions, owed money, and had a terrible singing voice.
And every hour you spent watching was another hour someone might watch you back.
That was the danger of patience. The longer you studied a target, the more visible you became. People noticed patterns. The same stranger near the gate, the same man at the inn, the same hooded figure standing too long by the chapel wall. The same beggar who never begged from the right people. The same pilgrim who seemed strangely uninterested in prayer. In a world where everyone knew everyone else, being unfamiliar was already suspicious. Being unfamiliar twice was dangerous. Being unfamiliar every night for a week was practically a confession. So you changed your clothes. You changed your posture. You carried baskets, tools, bundles of cloth, sacks of grain, anything that made you look like you belonged somewhere. One day you limped. Another day you did not. One evening you walked like a tired laborer. The next morning you bowed like a servant. But belonging was hard to fake.
Medieval communities were small, nosy, and extremely good at recognizing outsiders. A village might not know how to read Latin, but it knew when a stranger was pretending too hard to be ordinary. And then there were the animals.
No one talks enough about the animals. Dogs were a nightmare. They barked at strange smells, strange footsteps, strange shadows, and sometimes at absolutely nothing, with the confidence of creatures who believed every falling leaf was an enemy invasion. A single dog could ruin a plan that took 3 weeks to build. You could fool a sleepy guard, bribe a tired servant, climb a wall in silence, avoid loose stones, hold your breath while passing under a window, only for one dog to wake the entire courtyard because your boots smelled like another town. Horses were no better. They shifted, snorted, kicked, stamped, and made noise at the worst possible time. Chickens scattered. Geese screamed like tiny feathered alarm bells.
Pigs blocked alleys as if personally offended by your escape route. Medieval life was full of creatures, and none of them cared about your secrecy. Even the buildings seemed against you. Wood creaked, doors stuck. Stone steps were uneven. Floors groaned. Roofs crumbled under weight. A loose tile could betray you. A rusty hinge could announce you. A candle could go out at the wrong moment and leave you blind in a room you thought you knew. Nothing was smooth. Nothing was clean. Nothing worked exactly the way you needed it to. And then there was weather. Rain could hide your footsteps, but it could also turn roads into mud and walls into slippery death traps. Snow could cover tracks for a while, but it could also preserve them perfectly once the sky cleared. Fog could help you vanish, but it could also make you walk directly into a patrol. Cold made your fingers stiff. Heat made you sweat through your disguise.
Wind carried voices, slammed shutters, and turned torches into unreliable little disasters. A medieval assassin did not fight only people. He fought the world itself. The streets, the walls, the animals, the weather, the noise, the smell. The constant, exhausting unpredictability of a world that had no interest in helping him survive. And even if everything went well, even if the target appeared exactly where expected, even if the guards were distracted, even if the path was open, even if the night seemed almost too perfect, there was still one final enemy: the assassin's own mind. Because killing in stories is quick, clean, certain. The hero moves, the blade flashes, the enemy falls, the music rises. But real violence was not like that. Real violence was close, ugly, uncertain, and full of hesitation. Not always because the assassin was noble. Not always because mercy suddenly woke inside him. Sometimes the hesitation came from something much simpler and much older. Fear.
The body has its own instincts. A hand can shake, breath can catch, the throat can tighten. The heart can hammer so loudly that it feels impossible no one else can hear it. And in that frozen second, the mind can fill with 1,000 terrible questions. What if the target screams? What if the guard turns? What if the blade slips? What if the door opens? What if this is a trap? What if the man in front of you is not the right man? The last question mattered more than people imagine. Mistaken identity was not impossible. In dim rooms, crowded halls, bad weather and candlelight, faces changed. Cloaks hid bodies. Hoods covered hair. Men of the same rank dressed alike. Servants carried messages badly. Nobles sent substitutes. Rumors twisted details until certainty became dangerous. A tired assassin could follow the wrong figure, enter the wrong chamber,
wait beside the wrong bed, strike someone who was never meant to die, and there was no fixing that. You could not apologize to a corpse.
You could not explain to the client that the hallway was darker than expected. You could not ask the guards to pause while you checked whether the man on the floor was actually the Duke's cousin, the steward, or a very unlucky visiting priest. Once the act began, the world moved fast. Too fast. That was why assassins who survived were not always the strongest or the bravest. They were the ones who understood timing. They knew when not to move. They knew that a perfect chance could be bait. They knew that an empty hallway might be empty for a reason. They knew that an unlocked door was sometimes more frightening than a locked one. They knew that a drunk guard who looked too drunk might be pretending. They knew that a servant who avoided eye contact might have already betrayed them. They knew that survival sometimes meant abandoning the job entirely, even if it meant losing the payment, even if it meant angering the client, even if it meant spending the next month looking over their shoulder. Because sometimes the smartest assassin was the one who did nothing, the one who saw the extra guard, the one who noticed the servant staring too closely, the one who realized the target was not drunk enough, the room was not private enough, the silence was not natural enough. Walking away could save your life, but it could also ruin it. A failed job made you a liability. An abandoned job made you unreliable. And unreliable assassins did not receive polite warnings. They received visitors at night. So every choice was dangerous. Act, and you might die. Wait, and you might lose your chance. Leave, and your client might come for you. Stay, and the guards might find you. There was no safe option, only different kinds of risk. And that is what made the medieval assassin's life so exhausting. It was not one dramatic night of danger. It was danger stretched across every hour of existence. Eating was dangerous.
Sleeping was dangerous. Talking was dangerous. Silence was dangerous too, because silence made people curious. You could not fully trust an innkeeper, a beggar, a monk, a servant, a merchant, or the smiling man who offered you directions. Anyone might be harmless. Anyone might be watching. Anyone might remember your face later. Even prayer could become complicated. Churches were places of refuge, but also places full of eyes. Priests listened. Parishioners whispered. A man who entered too often looked guilty. A man who never entered looked suspicious. In the Middle Ages, your soul was everyone's business, and people loved noticing when someone seemed to be hiding one. So the assassin lived between worlds. Not fully a criminal among criminals, not fully a soldier, not fully a servant, not fully a free man. He moved through society like a stain people sensed before they saw. And perhaps that was the worst part. Not the guards, not the bad pay, not the cold nights, Not the dangerous clients.
not even the fear of death. The worst part was that the assassin slowly stopped belonging anywhere. He could sit in a crowded tavern and still be alone. He could hear people laughing around him and know none of them could ever know his real name. He could watch families return home at dusk and understand that such ordinary peace was no longer available to him. He had traded life for survival. And survival, in the end, was a very poor bargain. By the time an assassin became skilled enough to live through several jobs,
He was no longer the same person who had accepted the first one. He had learned to doubt kindness, to fear recognition, to sleep lightly, to leave before sunrise, to invent names so often that even the real one began to feel like something from another life. And that was how the work consumed him. Not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly. One secret at a time, one false name at a time, one locked door, one whispered order.
One narrow escape, one betrayal. One night spent listening for footsteps outside the door. Until finally, there was almost nothing left of the man underneath the hood. Only habit, only fear, only the instinct to keep moving. And that, perhaps, was the real horror of being a medieval assassin. Not that you might die young, but that you might survive long enough to become nothing else. By now you have probably understood the truth. Being a medieval assassin was not romantic. It was not noble. It was not especially profitable. And it certainly was not the beautiful shadow life imagined by stories, games, and legends. It was a harsh, thankless, short-lived existence wrapped in fear, dirty cloth, bad food, worse sleep, and the constant knowledge that almost everyone around you might want you dead. And you probably would not last. Not for a year, not for a month, maybe not even for a single day. Because you would arrive with the wrong idea.
You would imagine yourself calm, sharp, and in control, a silent figure moving perfectly through the darkness. But reality would be colder. Your cloak would be wet. Your stomach would be empty. Your hands would ache from climbing stone. Your feet would hurt from roads full of mud and broken rock. Your disguise would smell terrible. Your dagger would sit awkwardly against your body. Your heart would beat too fast every time a guard looked in your direction. You might enter a town with your cloak pulled tight, ready to act, only to learn that your target had moved. The guard might be drunk, but still dangerous. The servant you paid for information might sell you out for a cup of ale and a piece of bread. The innkeeper might remember your face. The stable boy might notice your horse. The priest might wonder why you never gave your real name. The dog might bark. And sometimes that would be enough. You could freeze at the wrong moment, strike the wrong person, miss your chance.
Trust the wrong guide. Drink from the wrong cup. Be recognized by a servant who once saw your face near the chapel. And suddenly, you would no longer be a shadow. You would be the problem. So you would run. But medieval streets were not built for graceful escapes. There was mud, uneven stone, wooden carts, animals underfoot, loose chickens in the road, drunken men outside taverns, vendors shouting, children staring, old women noticing far too much, and crowds that could turn against you in seconds if one person pointed and cried out. You might slip, you might fall, you might twist an ankle, you might lose the blade. You might be tackled by an angry guard who had already had a terrible day and was thrilled to finally have someone to blame. And if the crowd caught you, they might not wait for a trial. Fear moved faster than law. Suspicion moved faster than truth. A rumor could become a sentence before anyone asked your name. And even if you survived that, what then? No allies, no honor,
No clean reputation. No peaceful future. Just whispers, suspicion, and the growing realization that even if you succeeded, the best ending you could hope for was growing old alone under a false name in a village that still believed every strange noise came from spirits. So no, you would not last. And honestly,
You should not want to. Because the assassin's life was not cool. It was a cruel machine that swallowed desperate people and left behind nothing but rumors. It offered power without peace, purpose without belonging, money without safety. It promised freedom, but gave you hiding places. It promised control, but left you afraid of every door. It promised importance, but erased your name from the story. You did not truly make history. You haunted it. You moved through the margins, doing work that powerful people wanted done, but did not want remembered. And when the work was finished, the world did not thank you. It simply closed over you, like mud over a footprint.
Like smoke disappearing into rafters, like a whisper fading before anyone could prove it had been spoken. At the end, the only thing waiting was silence. Not the peaceful silence of rest, not the holy silence of a church at dawn, not the soft silence of sleep beside a warm fire, but the cold silence of being forgotten. The kind of silence no one questioned, because no one even remembered you had been there. And maybe that was the final truth about medieval assassins. They were not monsters from legends. They were not elegant shadows. They were not heroes in dark clothing. They were desperate people, used by more powerful people, thrown into danger, paid poorly, trusted by no one, feared by everyone, and remembered by almost nobody. A few may have changed history. Most simply disappeared into it. A name lost, a face forgotten, a blade buried, a life spent running from one dark street to another. And somewhere, centuries later, we imagine them as graceful, mysterious, almost romantic figures. But if you strip away the legend, the truth is much colder. A medieval assassin was not a master of death. He was a prisoner of survival. And survival in that world was often just another kind of sentence. So as the night grows quieter and the imagined castle fades into darkness, picture him one last time. Not standing proudly on a rooftop, not vanishing beautifully into moonlight, but walking alone down a muddy road before dawn, cloak pulled tight, head low, one hand near a hidden blade, listening for footsteps behind him. No glory, no peace, no name. Only the road, only the fear, only the endless need to keep moving. And then, slowly, even that shadow disappears.